We're talking to Alex Osterwalder, author of The Business Model Generation. And where I thought we'd start is perhaps just to give me a sense of the genesis of the idea for the book and the process that you went through to bring it to market.
So, I was working on it a couple of years back. I was finishing up a PhD dissertation on the topic of business models. And I worked with Yves Pigneur, who was my supervisor. So after that, I went on doing consulting around this topic, but we never really finished with what we wanted to do, which was to make a book that was more accessible. But what happened was pretty interesting is that I put the PhD online, and I had a blog on business models, and people started downloading it. Nobody ever told me a PhD is supposed to be read, so we might have written it in a different way. But basically, because there was demand, this idea of the book came back up, and even I sat together and we decided to make the book based on the fact that a lot of people were already starting to use the methodology. So the idea was to write a book that was extremely accessible and practical around business models and business model innovation. So that's what we set out to do, and because nobody has written the kind of book that we wanted to buy, we did it ourselves. So the book became very visual, very practical, very hands-on, but not simplistic, right? So trying to actually help people achieve something, business model innovation. So what happened then is that we tried to find a designer that would help us with the book, and we met Alan Smith, and we were extremely fortunate because I don't think without Alan understanding the content of the book and being such a great designer, we would have done such a good job in putting not just the content onto paper, but making it accessible. So I think we did a very different kind of book, and then the process in itself was very different as well. We might get to that.
Can I just interject? Because that was one piece that I was curious about was you recognized early on that design was going to be an important part. Was it almost that you wanted it to be happening in parallel, that the design and the construction of the book were in parallel, or that you needed to lay a bit of groundwork related to the book first and have a sense of direction before you could start incorporating design?
Well, I think design has to happen in parallel. It accompanies because it's about creating something. Now, the way we did it was a very iterative process. It was not always in parallel. Sometimes we wrote something, we gave it to Alan. Alan worked on it from the design point of view. It was very iterative. But I do think you can't separate. So this idea of making content and handing it over to the designer to put lipstick on a pig is a terrible idea because it won't make the book functional. Mm-hmm. So what we tried to do was not just to make a nice book, beautiful with colors and images. That was not the point. The point was to make a very applicable book, and basically, paper is a user interface, and we use that to convey the concepts. And since we're talking about business models, business model innovation, pretty complex concepts, design helped to simplify it. Design helped to make it practical, and that can only happen if you do that in an iterative process where the designer is involved in the whole content creation.
That iterative process, not only with your collaboration with Alan, but that really sort of speaks to the collaboration you had with your Business Model Hub community. And I'm wondering if you could speak a bit about that as it pertains to the development of the book and that same iterative process that you went through.
Yeah, so when we started out, people were already using our ideas, our method, the business model canvas. So we decided to write it in collaboration with others, essentially practitioners who were using the stuff, because we thought, we can write about our ideas, but what really counts are ideas, our experience, and the experience of others, because the more experience you can bring together, the better the content will be. So we set up a so-called hub. We call it the Business Model Hub, where people joined to help us on the content. So we wrote pieces of content. We called them book chunks. We sent them out to those people. At the end, there were 470. They gave their feedback back. They said what they liked, what they didn't like. They gave their examples, their their experience, and that made for much better content. It's very risky as authors, to kind of open up before it's finished and immediately submit it to the criticism of practitioners. But I think it made for a better book. And then we thought, to make it a special thing, we asked people to pay. So we said, if you want to join us and help us write the book, please pay a fee. And at the beginning, people paid $24. Many joined. We raised the price because we wanted to keep it exclusive. People still joined. And at the very end, there were some people who paid $243 to, participate, actually, just to get their name in the book, because, everybody who participated was a co-author and deserved having their name in the book and take part of the ownership there.
Was there ever a point when you talked about the risk of introducing content early to your audience as the author or the primary author? Was there ever a point where perhaps the feedback or the comments were such that you said, maybe not so much that maybe this wasn't a good idea, but you were reminded of those risks that you were concerned about?
No, I think it's a mindset. I mean, if you open up, you have to expect that people will push back, and I think that's very good. It makes for stronger content. So we didn't always accept all the ideas. Obviously, we said no when we thought it was right, but we argued why we thought it was wrong, right? Or why we thought it was right to integrate those ideas. So we never regretted, but obviously sometimes the discussions got a bit heated. But we had a very strong idea of which direction we wanted to go towards. So we always, we did keep the final say, but we never really went in another direction than what we felt was right with people.
As the collaboration wound down in terms of the book's completion, what was the process like from finalizing the book and getting it to market? Talk to me a bit about that.
Well, when we finished the book and the content part, right, we already had people participating. They financed part of the design costs and the printing costs. People pre-purchased the book also. And then we printed it ourselves or with a printing house because we thought, let's go on our own. Let's have a really good story here. And probably no publisher would have taken us on at that point. Now, the funny thing was the very first print was we had this book launch when the book wasn't finished, and we thought, okay, well, let's print the unfinished book with some of the content that was not designed. And it was really funny because it was a disaster. They printed the pages wrong, and so you get into all these funny things. But then the real print, when we printed the first couple of thousand copies, worked out okay. We sold the 5,000 copies really quickly. We reprinted a second print run, and it took off. And I think what made this a success story was that we used a different business model, that we did it together with 470 people who felt ownership and basically became our sales force also, because they were really proud of what we created all together. And they went out there and started showing the book to their colleagues, to their friends, and that's the way it started taking off. And then, once the book was already a success, publishers started knocking on our doors, and we finally decided to sell the global publishing rights to Wiley, which was a very good decision because they do have very strong channels. But what was interesting is that, I shouldn't be saying this probably, I don't think they would have published the book. The ideas that we had. 4-color book is very expensive to make. Landscape format doesn't fit into any bookshelf. Doing it with 470 people who pay. This is all practically breaking all the rules of publishing. But I do think it was really nice now to work with Wiley, and they brought it to another level. And now it's among the best-selling softcover books in the U.S., for example.
But all those rules you broke were for a purpose, because you wanted the look and feel and usability of that book to be the differentiator, and not at the expense of shelf space or the dictation of a publisher. But what I'm also curious about, the getting on the likes of Wiley's radar. yes, it was based on word of mouth and success. But what I'm curious about was the word of mouth and the success. How much would you credit to social media, and even going a little bit further back, how much would you credit social media for the collaboration surrounding the book's creation in the first place?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of elements to it. I mean, the first one is the product itself. So before I get to social media, I think social media in itself, if you don't have anything good to say or good to sell, doesn't work. I mean, it's not, you can't, it's again, you can't put lipstick on a pig. So the one thing is, Eve and I really wanted to create the type of management book that we would love to buy. And we were inspired by some of the books that were out there, but nobody really did exactly what we thought we would really like to buy. So we started doing that, and I think that's part of the success. And I'll hand over to Alan, who's right beside me here, because he played a huge role there. But then once we had that part done, once the content was created, designed, together with the 470 people, then comes the part where you do need to go to market. And the fact that that we worked with 470 people, I think was crucial to the success. And without social media, that wouldn't have happened, right? This was a platform that we set up, a collaborative platform on the internet. People could join and participate, and then they could take some of that and go out and do more. And we had zero marketing budget. We didn't even do Google ads, but we did a lot of viral marketing through SlideShare, through Twitter, all the kind of things that you can use to give your work some visibility. But I think without this product in the middle that we really felt strong about, we felt that it's more than a book. It sounds a bit silly, right? Mm-hmm. But we were inspired by Apple, where there's this unboxing experience where you're excited to open the box to get what's inside. And I think books should be the same thing. It's not just about the content, but it's an exciting thing that you really want to buy. Mm-hmm. It's aesthetic. You want to have it in your bookshelf, and this is what we've seen by a lot of people. So maybe I can hand over to Alan for some questions around the thing itself.
Sure. Good to see you. So we've just been talking about the genesis of the book, and wondering if you can speak to, I guess we were talking about how the rules were broken for not only the look and feel, but the usability of the book. Ignoring what publishers might enforce in terms of, we want to see, or it's got to be of a certain dimension for shelf space and packability, or whatever the criteria might be. But you broke away from all that because ultimately the look, feel, and usability was the priority. And I'm just wondering if you could perhaps speak a bit about that.
Yeah, sure. So the story begins when I actually went to one of Alex's workshops because I was interested in learning more about this business model stuff. And afterwards, so I went to his workshop, and afterwards I went to his blog. And on the blog, there's a photo of a book with this girl with tattoos like all over on one side, and the other side was all handwriting. And he had a note saying, it'd be cool if business books were more like this, right? That would be a cool business book. And I was thinking exactly the same thing, but didn't think that any business author was crazy enough to do something like that, to let their content be treated in an interesting way, really. So from there, it was just, okay, well, let's actually try to see what that looks like, but actually be true to the content, not crazy for crazy's sake. Let's try to really enhance it and take it up a notch. Because, you drag your eyes across, a million lines of text in these business books, these 6x9s with maybe 2 diagrams in the whole thing. You're not really getting the depth of the concepts and the idea that the author actually has in there. It's really tough for people to put that all together. Our visual processing just takes up a big pile of our brain, and it's so much easier to remember visuals. So a big part of this was just to make it really, really accessible. And that goes for the writing as well. The writing is really accessible too. There's very little jargon in it. It's very straightforward. And as for the actual format that we chose it that way so that we also found this special binding in Holland where you could open the book up and lay it flat, because we wanted it to be a workbook. The idea was that you'd be in a boardroom or in a room with a whiteboard or something, you'd have it open on the table, helping it lead you through some exercises, right? So, I think that's pretty much it.
Mm-hmm. As you released indicators of the final look and feel of the book to the hub, what was the initial feedback? Because presentation or visuals are subjective. I'm just curious what the commentary or feedback was over the course of it. Yeah,
absolutely. So one of the things we did really early on was push out 3 potential directions. So what we did was we pulled together a series of references around 3 concepts. One of the concepts was this, we're going crazy, right? We're gonna this is the whole new school concept of business. This is the new ideas behind business, and it had like exploding heads and giant eyeballs and blood everywhere. It was pretty intense. Neon colors are really crazy. We had another one that was very Swiss and corporate and clean and clear, playing off one of the ideas that we thought in the book. We're trying to make things clear for people. We're trying to just 9 building blocks, canvas, very simple. Let's just make things very clear. And then we had a third direction, which was about sort of like a workbench or a drawing board, and that these are things that need to be crafted. A business model is something that you work on continuously over time, and you are kind of a craftsman while you're working on this stuff. It takes work. It's messy. It's a process, right? So we got a lot of feedback from this, and it really helped us help decide what type of book we were trying to make. And the process won out by a long shot. It wasn't even close. And there were so many ideas in there visually that we pulled from directly, like things like a blackboard. This blackboard texture ended up coming in on some of the pages, these little chalkboard sketches. Post-it notes, handwriting were all things that were in that mood board. We just pulled them straight out and put them in the place in the book where they were appropriate. And as subjective as things were at sometimes, there was very little pushback on that. People were really excited by it pretty much the whole way.
Terrific. I guess now that the book is finished, and you've now channeled your efforts into taking the core theme of the book and putting it into an iPad app. I'd like to hear more about was it obvious as the book was winding up, or as soon as you had heard about the likes of the iPad, or maybe even you were thinking more of a computer program to replicate it, what, this is directed for the two of you, what the catalyst was, or how did that come about?
Well, I'll say one thing and then hand it over to Alex, which is that the very first workshop I actually went to, I thought this would be cool as a spreadsheet, right? Like this is, if this could somehow be some sort of, super tool for thinking about business, both in a conceptual way, but also in a very concrete numbers-based way, that'd be amazing to be able to put those things together in one tool, which just doesn't exist. And then what I found out later was that when Alex had actually come up with the 9 building blocks in the language of the canvas, it was because they were trying to create a language that could be computational, that could be something that a computer could actually use, which is why it's so obvious that the canvas really should become a tool at some point in time. So Alex, sorry.
So it's funny that Alan is mentioning this because, much back in the PhD I was working on, the idea of giving business models a structure was indeed to be able to build software. You can't build software on some kind of fuzzy concept, right? You need some rigor to it. Now that idea got forgotten a bit for a while, and the business model canvas was taking off in the world, and I was doing talks and workshops. But then at one workshop I was doing with a software company, it was just that overnight Steve Jobs was announcing the launch of the iPad. It was a no-brainer, right? I mean, seeing somebody. Oops. Sorry for that.
Okay.
Seeing somebody with a finger, pulling stuff around on a screen in a seamless way, that's what you want to be able to do when you use a tool like the business model canvas. You can do that with paper and post notes easily on a poster. But can you do that on a computer screen? Well, if you can use your fingers, then it's intuitive, right? Mm-hmm. So it was a no-brainer for me to take this to the iPad, rather than maybe start out with the web where you have a larger audience. But it's really about creating a prototype of a tool of the future where you use your hands to manipulate the business concepts you're working on. So that's how it took off. And again, I think what we're trying to do is very similar to what we did with the book, is to make something that is very accessible, that to a certain extent democratizes the access to business model thinking. So with the book, which was something that was amazing, that people started buying business model generation, that they never were interested in business books before. It's their first business book. Designers who think, wow, this is cool, it looks good, but then also architects that just want to get into business thinking, but they wouldn't buy the traditional strategy book. So we broadened the audience, and I think for me a success factor would be, and I assume it's the same for Alan, I guess, because we're working on this in the same way with the same vision, is if we can make business model thinking more accessible to people who usually wouldn't open up a spreadsheet. And because you have now this visual interface that looks like a game almost, where you pull around Post-it notes, you think, okay, what is my value proposition, my revenue streams? And behind it, it automatically generates a spreadsheet without the complications. That's amazing, right? So the idea here is really, again, simplicity without getting simplistic, becoming simplistic, and allowing people to figure out, well, what is my business model? How could I do this? Could I for the same thing, for the same product, same value proposition, same technology, could I think of 4 or 5 different business models with different assumptions, different revenue streams, different cost structures in order to find the best one? Now, that's difficult when you don't have a tool to do that, and you don't have, whatever, an MBA degree or so. But if you have simple tools that allow you to do that, you will do it. Right, so that's, I think, our aspiration to what we're trying to start with the iPad app. That's a beginning to make something that democratizes this business thinking and allows everybody to think about business models, everybody to come up with amazing business models.
Has there been anything distinct or unique about the experience importing to the iPad, from challenges to, are you getting a different type of person interested in it, or are most people interested in this as a complement to the book they already have?
Well, I think the first audience will obviously be people who bought the book. We tested this online to see people who are interested in the application, do they have the book or not? And I think about 3/4 do have the book already. But that's a start. I think once you have a tool like this, a digital tool, it should spread pretty quickly. What do you think?
One thing to add to that, just your question, Andrew, about porting to the iPad. Since this was the first time it had actually become a tool, there are a lot of design challenges. And I think if we had gone straight to a web tool, it's so cheap to develop for the web and so quick to develop for the web, that we would have made something that was really unruly. It would have had way too many moving parts and pieces, and we wouldn't have been able to keep it simple. And the iPad sort of has this forced simplicity to it. You can't make an app that's that complex. You just can't. It's literally, you can't, right? It just can't be done. So it's really forced us to try to figure out the simplest way of doing some of these activities that I think we would have maybe cheaped out on if we were working on a different platform.
Okay. Or perhaps it could have, to your point, could have resulted in overkill.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we would have definitely ended up with something more complex, I can say without a doubt, and overkill, like you say. Mm-hmm. As for how people are going to be using it, who's going to be using it, we did a little bit of customer development up front and sort of finding out who's interested in it for what. And it's been interesting to see that a lot of startups are interested in it. And the corporate market's a little bit smaller just because the business people aren't working on iPads as often yet. And a lot of small business and a lot of consultants are interested in it. So just an idea of the market.
Mm-hmm. The collaboration with Steve Blank has been extending the ideas laid out in the book, and now to a certain degree the iPad. And I'm wondering more about was that collaboration driven by the same sort of crowdsourcing theme that existed for the creation of the book? Like, did people suggest a collaboration? Was it, or was it more of an evolution based on your own interest and awareness of one another?
Well, it's pretty funny how it happened. I mean, Steve has this incredible entrepreneurial career and then put this together, synthesized this in a book, and now is teaching at Stanford, Berkeley, and Columbia, and writing his blog with a lot of followers. He was posting something on the business model ontology, how it was called in the dissertation, and the business model canvas after it. And I was looking at his work, so it happened naturally. And once we started out, a lot of people said, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and a lot of people were actually already doing that, so trying to merge the methodologies on their side. But it's a very natural fit, because Steve has this great methodology, customer development, to test business models. And that's something we didn't talk about at all in the book. How once you started developing alternatives and you made a choice in which direction you want to go, well, how do you test them? Can you test them? And that's where there's a natural fit. It's a little bit like the front end and the back end, right? Right. The business model canvas is an excellent tool to start sketching out your business model. And then once you start testing your business model, to keep score, to come back, to pivot when you think you need to change it because you learn something is not going to work. And then you draw it out, you draw out the path that you went through. So it was really a natural fit, and it happened quite naturally. What's really interesting is that these ideas came from very different parts of the world and found each other, right? One coming out of Silicon Valley and one coming out of Lausanne, Switzerland. And sometimes we joke about it. It's pretty interesting. But I think it is a fit, and I think this is just a start. The whole lean startup movement fits in there pretty well with agile development. And then there are a couple of methods that could fit. So this idea of putting all these methods together that help entrepreneurs but also business people to develop better businesses just makes a lot of sense, rather than each of us doing something in our corner. So this is a start, and I think we'll see more of it. It's just the beginning. We're also learning how to put this together. This is pretty young, but I'm excited about it because there are two big chunks that fit together. They're extremely complementary, and I'm excited about that because I think we do need to look at how we build startups or new business models within companies in a more systematic way. Not like we've done it until now, often coming out of a crisis situation, because there will also be pressure to do that more. The industry is transforming. So it's a pretty exciting thing that Steve and I got together to start working on this, and that others will hopefully join in the future.
Will it lead to a new version of the iPad app, maybe for the second generation iPad?
Hopefully.
Well, just picking up on where you talked about a change in the methodology of developing business models. One of the other things that I'm curious about from your perspective is whether or not you're seeing indicators either in the market or sector or specific businesses, however you want to term it, that, I was at a conference in September where they described Blockbuster getting Netflixed. So do you see any indicators where an industry or a business or sector needs to push the reset button on their business model? And if so, what those might be, or what your thoughts are in that respect?
I think it's hard to generalize. I would advise any company to continuously scan the environment and look at the periphery, what business models are emerging. That's one thing. And then, at the same time, I think it's really important that companies don't just look outside and around them, what's going on, but that they start out as proactively as possible to build a portfolio of business models. Because sometimes you don't know that you're going to be disrupted. There are no indicators. Mm-hmm. And then comes along a Skype, that kills your long distance revenue and long distance call revenues in the telecom sector. So I think while sometimes you can see the indicators, sometimes you don't. I think the real medicine against that is to be proactive and to maintain a portfolio of business models, just like we maintain a portfolio of products, which has become very natural, right? We do product innovation naturally. We have different product life cycles. We have a product portfolio. I think we're going to see the same thing for business models.
To close things off with what's next?
I think one of the big things is that we can't do business model innovation without management innovation and organizational innovation. Particularly if we want to do business model innovation within big organizations, established organizations. So I think one of the big things that people like Gary Hamel have put their finger on already is management innovation. I think while we're starting to talk about it, while we're looking at it as a relevant thing to do, we haven't figured it out yet, and we don't have any concepts to do that yet, just like we would have maybe the business model canvas in the field of business models. And I think it's extremely important, so we're able to reinvent ourselves. It's difficult to do business model innovation that cuts across organizations. But B, also, I think what's really important is today, if you look at the reports of people's happiness at the workplace, well, many people are looking around to change their jobs. I think that some of the numbers are around 70%. 70% of people want to move on. Why is it? Because a lot of people are unhappy at their workplace. A lot of people, if they have a great idea, they want to leave their companies to build that idea outside. Why is it? Because probably their idea can't grow in the company, and if they grow it, probably they won't be remunerated for bringing that idea to flourish. So I think this is a huge issue. That's one of the big things. I would be happy to work on that, but for the business model stuff, it took 10 years to emerge. But I think we can see a lot of great thinkers going into that topic as one of the big things. And maybe Alan, what's the next big thing?
I think the next big thing in this space is something we've been talking about here, like. We're just up in the Alps on a working retreat, and one of the things that we've been talking about a lot is the idea of, 20 years ago when architects first got computer-aided design, buildings really started changing. They were, to say they're better or worse, that's subjective, but they're doing more with less material. They're different, that's for sure, and they come together a lot faster. As strategists and business designers, getting a hold of computer-aided design tools, we're going to start seeing some really interesting stuff. Things are just going to change. And I think there's going to be a lot of tools in the next 5 years or 10 years, coming together to really open up new space and new ground for people who are innovating. Is it going to make things better? Tough to say. Is it going to make more different stuff? Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well,
we're working on the iPad app and hopefully more.
Well, I'm looking forward to the Management Innovation Generation book that'll be out sometime in the. One can hope, right? But to your earlier point that it was 10 years sort of in the making and evolution. What you've seeded and what you're also seeing evolve in terms of business models, strategy, and I really like the analogy you gave about the computer-aided design's impact. I think, and I'm excited by the prospect of what the next 10 years holds for all of us. So, gentlemen, I want to thank you for your time. This was fantastic, and I wish you the best of luck with your collaboration going on now in the Alps, and I look forward to taking a look at the output in the coming weeks and months.